Elevation, we hunting, we hungry, we celebrating, turning nothing to something and celebrating. Markets changing, recalibrating. The first to get acclimated is the first to stack the payments, but you need to act with patience, but be careful waiting, cause this opportunity won't last forever before it is evaporated. So if you wanna flip some houses, hit me up to make a plan. Your flip deserves the upper hand. Elevation, elevation.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Raising the Flipping Bar. I'm your host, Derek Marlin, and I'm excited to have a staple of the podcast, and it's going to be another episode of the Elevation Business Book Club. And this is something that we've done a couple different times, and it's, like I said, something I really want to get back to. We'll probably do a quarterly from now on, and it's going to be a blend of business strategy, of marketing, lead generation, and also personal development, obviously through the lens of real estate investing, kind of all wrapped up into one. And really the way that this kind of, this idea evolved, if you will, is my wife, Ann, is in multiple book clubs. And not to go too far down a rabbit hole, but apparently a lot of women can be in and actually both national and international book clubs. My wife's book club friend group has traveled to lots of fun cities. They've been to New Orleans. They've been to Austin, Texas. One of their friends, Cindy, has a beautiful place in Portugal that I hear. So I have a feeling the book club will be international soon. So just a shout out to their book club. But I was like, wait, why should they have all the fun? And so me being a total nerd was like, instead of just a bunch of dudes getting together and talking, because I don't think anybody would listen to that, I want to talk about business. And so this is something that is near and dear to my heart. And again, we're going to do this on a quarterly basis. And what I've done, I've always been an avid reader. And I think it's something that's super, super important, which you'd think you'd be burned out because from doing undergrad and doing graduate school, like, I don't want to read any more books. I think we're going to be left in the dust. And there's people that are obviously so much smarter than what we're doing right now. And so I think you can obviously learn a ton. And kind of a pivot that I made is I used to use it as a badge of honor of like, how many books could I read in 1 year? But I didn't really, maybe I didn't retain everything. I surely did not put things into action. So in 2024, I actually did something different. I took my top 4 or 5 books that I felt were the most beneficial, and I actually read them 3 or 4 times each. And then I really tried to implement them. And so you can go back, we're probably 20 episodes ago where we had our first business book club. And we really dove into a couple of books that I use really, really frequently. But I kind of got bored, honestly, of rereading the same stuff over and over and over again. So in 2025, I'm kind of somewhere in the middle, and I'm trying to kind of balance both reading from a business perspective, which I have to read in the morning or during the day. If I read those at night, my mind just will not stop. I can't go to sleep. I have to get up and start working. And I feel like Jerry Maguire writing his manuscript, like it's obviously not good. But my pleasure reading is also a little bit nerdy too. So when I'm on vacation, we're recording this episode and it'll come out here in September. So over the summer, I read 2 really great books. One is actually called The Return of the Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. He's hands down one of my most favorite authors, and he's a social scientist. So it's kind of like on the fringe of some business, it's on the fringe of some of those business books, but you still get a ton out of it. And it's a little bit more of like general thought provoking instead of like, oh, I got to get out my notebook and do a ton of research and start writing stuff down. And then the second one is Think and Grow Rich. And that is absolutely a classic. If you haven't read that, you really have to read it. It's by Napoleon Hill, who is, a lot of people would say kind of the godfather, if you will, of personal development. And he was backed by Andrew Carnegie, one of the titans of industry in the United States in the late 1800s, all the way through the early 1900s. And so I think it's kind of cool because one book, The Tipping Point Revisited, was looking back at the first version that he wrote 20 years ago and seeing some of the changes that Malcolm Gladwell forecasted and then stuff he didn't see coming. And then another book from 1937, Think and Grow Rich. And that's crazy because there's so many of those things that still resonate. That was about 6 years after the end of the Great Depression and obviously World War II, in between World War I and World War II, I should say. And some of those things are kind of crazy. The first time I read that book was during COVID. And so there was a lot of parallels of what was going on in the world from Great Depression to COVID. Who knew what the hell was going on? And then this time I really thought of it on the precipice of AI. I really feel like we are right on the edge of some major, major developments, and those are changing rapidly. So as you know, you kind of get kids back to school. Again, I thought this would be the perfect time to jump into the Elevation Business Book Club. So as we get back to it, we're going to kind of do it a little bit differently on the second go round of the Business Book Club. And we're going to do 2 book reviews and then actually a podcast review, because a lot of people consume not only their books from an audio format, but obviously I'm a huge proponent of podcasts. We're obviously recording one, and I really enjoy doing this, but I listen to a ton of different podcasts. So the 3 things that we're going to talk about today, number 1 is called The 5 Types of Wealth by, and I actually learned how to pronounce his name right, Sahil Bloom. I just listened to him on a podcast called Finding Mastery by Dr. Michael Gervais, and that was an amazing episode. So it was cool to read this book. And then I probably finished this one, I guess it was summer, so it's probably 4 or 5 months ago, and then listen to the podcast. This one was awesome. The next one we're going to talk about is a book called Relentless by Tim Grover. And I read this one actually 3 or 4 years ago. Originally, I've read it twice overall. And then the third piece of media, I guess I should say, that we're going to talk about is a podcast called Modern Wisdom by Chris Williamson. And his stuff is phenomenal. Modern Wisdom is just a great, well-rounded podcast that really, again, dives into personal development, a lot of business stuff, but super, super well-rounded. So first, let's talk about The 5 Types of Wealth by Sahil Bloom. And this one, I'm trying to think of, okay, I remember where it was. I heard about it from Tim Cook, who's obviously the CEO of Apple, and then Bill Ackman, who's the billionaire founder of a hedge fund called Pershing Square Capital. And it was interesting because those guys, I think it was part of commencement speeches that they gave. It was their number 1 recommended book from last year. And I thought that was interesting because those guys are obviously super, super driven on the financial side, but it talks about, looking at wealth from 5 different pillars that we'll get into here in just a second. And so for me, I think the interesting thing is it's kind of like, I don't know, this interesting inflection point in my life right now. And just to give you some backstory, Elevation just kind of celebrated its 10-year anniversary, which is something that we're really proud of. I forget the exact number, but there's something crazy like by 10 years, 90% of businesses have gone out of business. So there's been some rocky times. There's been some great times, but we're still refining and we're learning and we're growing and building the business. So that's kind of interesting. I'm only a year and a half away from 50, which again, age is truly only a number for me, but I do think there's something kind of big about 50. I joke with my kids that I'm going to live to 100. So I guess I'm at the halfway mark. And then I've got kids going off to college. So I've got a son who will start his sophomore year in a couple weeks. And I've got a senior daughter in high school and a junior daughter in high school. So they're getting ready to go to college. They're, kind of going through that life transition. And then I've got parents who are in their mid 70s. It's really fun because they're still in really good shape. I think they probably eat cleaner and healthier than I do, honestly. And so they definitely have, I think, hopefully quite a while left to spend time with us together. And so it's really looking at your goals and building wealth in much more of a full circle manner, which is actually one of our core, company missions as well, is building full circle value. I should say that again, is building full circle value. And now I'm actually saying it, 5 pillar wealth, of looking at wealth in 5 different facets. And so the way he describes it is trying to build your dream life around 5 main pillars. The first one is time wealth. The second one is social wealth. Think friends and family. The third one is mental. I almost call that emotional wealth. The fourth one is physical wealth. And then the 5th pillar is the financial wealth. And again, I think in our world, in our industry, a lot of people would put financial as number 1. That's always like the scorecard, if you will, is people are thinking of like, what's my net worth? What financial independence have I hit? I 100% was guilty of that for a long time. But what I really like to think about it is the time wealth. Time truly is our most valuable asset. And we obviously don't want to waste it. And it really goes by fast. I mean, sometimes, as they say, the days are super long sometimes when you've got hard days, especially if you're pulling a 12 to 14, 16-hour workday. But the weeks go by fast. I feel like I blink half the time. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's already Friday. I'm trying to spend time with the kids and my wife, and stuff just flies by. And then another year goes by. And something that from this book that was like super, super, honestly, gut wrenching, but I think it's really, really impactful is what hit him I think his parents are maybe a little bit older than mine. I don't know, hard to say. But he was living on the other side of the country, and he visited his family once a year, which a lot of us do. My folks live in North Carolina full time, and they've moved out of Colorado. And so, yeah, we're only seeing them once a year. We're trying to increase that. But they said, okay, if let's just keep the math simple. If your parents are 70 and they live to 85, you're only going to see your folks 15 more times in a year. And like that was hard, man. Like that seriously choked me up. And so for me, it's about making, time to obviously spend with friends and family and loved ones. But also working in the business too. I still love what we do. Uh, and so for me, we've just done something kind of fun. Those of you guys that have followed the podcast will all know that I started my professional career in sports with the Denver Broncos and spent 6 seasons with the team. And so was really lucky to travel around and see a lot of away games with the Broncos in different cities. And so the only thing that I'm one of four boys, and my dad and my brothers and I, the only thing we know we 100% agree on, everybody's very different from a political standpoint, from a financial standpoint, from a religious standpoint, which is obviously healthy. But the cool thing is that we all love the Broncos. So our goal is to see every NFL stadium and see the Broncos play at every away game. And so I think we're on season number 9. We just booked our plans. We're going to go see them play. I almost said the Redskins, the Washington Commanders. I should be correct. And we'll see them play in Washington. And then I've been fortunate enough to see about 10 other stadiums. So I've seen about half of the stadiums. But again, it's just making that time commitment and really taking that from an audit perspective and looking at it on a monthly basis and saying, where am I spending my time? And the other thing he said is, it's not where you say you're spending your time, it's where you actually spend your time. So again, a lot of times for us, and again, I'm guilty of it too, those are two very different things. So the second pillar that Bloom talks about is social wealth. And I'm kind of blending this with one of my other favorite authors, Simon Sinek, who wrote the book Start With Why. Those of you that have been through the Elevation Academy know that that's a core piece of really what we kicked the whole thing off with. But I listened to another podcast by him, actually on the Chris Williamson podcast, and he's writing his next book about the power of friendship. And I think that plays in perfectly into kind of like, Bloom asks in his book, if your funeral was tomorrow or whenever, I guess, who would be in the front row of your funeral? And I thought that was really, really impactful. And so it's really about who you keep from a friend basis in addition to your family as well. We're kind of running across this with our kids. And if you don't surround yourself with people that are going in the right direction and lifting you up and hopefully even pulling you along, if you're always the one dragging them along, that's probably going to be a recipe for kind of a challenging situation. And so for me, it's all about focusing on that social wealth. So you got to have time to do what you want, and then you got to figure out who you want to do this stuff with. So whether it's friends and family, whether it's, I call them business friends, associates that we talk about business, but we still really get along really well. I think that's super, super important. And I don't know, it's just something that was also kind of interesting in this aspect is like, okay, if you're at a cocktail party and you're talking to somebody, instead of just saying like, hey, I'm Derek and I'm a real estate investor, what do you do? It's really kind of it's really like looking at it and thinking of it differently and saying like, hey, what's your pain point? What's something that's really kind of got you up at night? What's challenging you? Because that'll really get you to the core of what they're feeling at that time. And then again, hopefully you can be a better friend and really work on that social wealth component. So just something to think about. They go into number 3, which is the mental wealth component. And, that's developing a growth mindset, a resilience to overcome challenges. Especially in the real estate market right now, we're just past the halfway point in 2025. And those of you guys out there investing and buying and selling, it's been challenging. And again, I really like this because I nerd out on the scorecard side of things. And so at the end of each chapter, he gives you kind of the scorecard to work over or to think about and work on. And this one scores it as from a mental, or again, kind of the emotional side of things. How are you scoring on a purpose perspective, on a growth perspective, and then giving yourself space to think? And I think that one is super, super important. I mean, as they say, a lot of times people come up with their best ideas in the shower. And it's like, it's one of the few times, maybe it's early in the morning. You don't have a lot else going on. You're just, taking a shower and you're like, wow, that's a good idea. I think giving yourself time to think gives you the ability to reset and wrestle with some of those kind of challenging questions and really just give yourself the ability to listen to your inner voice. And Napoleon Hill talks about this. It's almost like that subconscious that should be kind of working in the background as your operating system 24/7. But you can't, like, if you're always just grinding. I know our culture right now is really focused on the grind. There's a time and place for that, absolutely. But it's really carving out specific time to kind of just think, and I think good things will happen, and it should help your mental, and emotional state. So the fourth pillar that Bloom talks about is physical wealth. And I thought this was interesting. I did kind of wrestle with myself. Again, I read this a couple months ago. I just listened to a great podcast with him and Dr. Gervais. But I don't know. I might move physical up the food chain. I've kind of had some crazy battles with a bunch of different back surgeries and have nerve damage that we still haven't quite figured out 5 years later. And there's definitely challenging days where if I let my physical health kind of go to hell in a handbasket, I don't know if I can do well in those 5 other facets. So it's interesting that he put it at number 4. I honestly would argue number 2, but here we are. Obviously, we can all grind, we can all hustle, but you can only kind of crush it so long. For me, this is almost a 2-for-1. My physical wealth helps me with my emotional and mental well-being. I'm old school. I grew up playing football. I actually was a power lifter too. I know if my wife listened to this, she's going to laugh. People are like, what the hell is that? It's a Texas thing, but I digress. But I still actually love lifting heavy weights. And I've had to do it differently because of all these back surgeries. But I know that if I don't go, or if I go too long, I should say, without working out, I'm just cranky. Actually, my wife had the best term, and she actually calls it menstruation. And definitely there were times where I was just ornery, and I'm like, I just got to get back to the gym. I got to work out. I got to kind of, in my mind, put my body back together and fix myself. I had some great buddies that I hang out with, and we used to all run races together. So we did Spartan races. We did Tough Mudders. Those were so fun. Like I said, unfortunately, I'm kind of screwed from a surgery perspective, so I can't do those anymore. But the way he talks about it is there's 3 kind of sub pillars in this section or category. It's about movement, which is obviously any form of exercise. I think as we hit different aspects of life, maybe you don't want to lift heavy weights anymore. Getting on a bike, going for a run, doing whatever you're going to do, just some sort of exercise and movement. Nutrition is obviously super, super important. Trying to get a little leaner now so that I can be really, really lean coming into my 50s. And I hate to say it, but like nutrition is honestly like 70% of where it's at, and working out is about 30%. I used to be able to get by eating whatever I wanted in my 20s and 30s, and now I got to be kind of careful. And then the other one that I'm not good at, but I've really been focusing on it lately, is recovery, which is sleep. Again, I used to take it as a badge of honor where we'd be busy doing stuff, and I'd have kids' activities and kids playing competitive sports, and you get home and you're eating at 9 o'clock at night. You end up sadly doing a little bit more work, and you're going to sleep at 11 something, even worse sometimes. And then I woke up at 4:44 because I'm weird. I like that number. And I was just trying to beat other fictitious people that didn't mean anything. And then I actually went to a doctor, and they're like, no, this is really damaging to your health. So I'm really trying to get better. I wake up now at 5:27 every day during the week. I sleep in a little bit on the weekends. I can still do that, which is nice. Recovery and sleep is super, super important. So again, he has it at pillar 4. I'd kind of argue number 2, but either way, it's something you really got to focus on. And then finally, he gets to the 5th pillar, which is financial wealth. Kind of the interesting thing about this is the first question, and I would let you guys sit with this, is he really, really hammers in for you to define what is your definition of enough. And I think that is super, super important. And one of the exercises that I did with, it was from an Alex Hormozy video. And I think the way that he outlined it, he actually almost did it on a whiteboard. And it was like, yeah, people want to, if it's again, kind of the classic super, baller lifestyle or whatever the hell you want to call that. It was flying on a private jet, going on these crazy vacations, being able to have that financial independence. But he really broke it down, and he's like, do you need to own the jet, or do you just want to fly privately 3 times a year and then maybe business class in addition to that? And yeah, do we want to go on this, private island vacation? But like if you went to, the Dominican Republic, instead of flying to Fiji, you could probably have, on a scale of 1 to 10, a 9 out of a 10, maybe a 9.5 versus Fiji's a 10 out of 10. Instead of spending, let me say that again. Instead of spending $100,000 on a vacation, can you do a really great vacation for 20 grand? So what he did is he kind of broke it all down. And I think most people can live probably a better life than they ever imagined, making about $750,000 a year. That's not even seven figures. And again, I'm not trying to like put, confines and constraints on what people make and what they earn, and that's all well and good. But I think it's super important to define like what is enough. And then at certain points, you can obviously recalibrate. What I thought was enough coming out of graduate school, getting my dream job, starting a family, I was like, oh my God, I made $100,000. That was enough. Now that barely pays the bills, sadly, because I got 3 kids going into college. And so what he looks at is 3 different buckets that you got to focus on from financial. You've got to focus on income generation. You've got to focus on expense management, which I think is super underrated. If you spend a ton, or excuse me, if you make a ton, but then you spend a ton, that doesn't really get you ahead. And then long-term investing. And they really focus that on like the deferred gratification standpoint. So I roll this into my Traction Business Planning, the book that I talked about in the last business book club. And I put that into my planning. So again, those 3 buckets are super, super important when you're kind of breaking out like what type of financial success are you defining with your life. And so as we kind of wrap up this business book review and jump to the next one, it's really talking about, again, at the end of every chapter, it's practical tips for these 5 types of wealth and then how do they fit into your daily lives and your daily routine. You really want to score yourself on all 5 areas, and it's never going to be perfect. You're going to ebb it and flow it sometimes where maybe you're crushing it financially because you've had some great opportunities come down your pipeline, but you had to work really, really hard. And maybe your health and wellness fell off. Maybe your mental wealth and emotional wealth kind of fell off. Never going to be perfect. I like to kind of just say that things are in harmony. It's not that it's balance, but it's harmony. And so I think that's super, super important. And then kind of a shout out from one of my colleagues in another mastermind. He brought this up and I really like it, is doing that audit on your birth date of each month. So my birth date's December 19th. So now I actually just started this last month is I'll do this, do this financial audit, my 5-pillar audit, not just financial, I should say. And I'll do it on the 19th. And I'm going to really try to keep that going. I think that's super, super important, is kind of like doing it with some consistency. So as we wrap up, I think, the 5 Types of Wealth by Sahil Bloom, freaking awesome book. Just got so much out of it. For those of you guys watching online, you can kind of see I've got all my nerdy notes and highlighting and everything else. And I love doing this because then when you read it again, you kind of feel good about like, okay, I've made some progress and I've made some strides. Okay, so let's dive into book number 2. It's called Relentless by Tim Grover. And if you're going to ask yourself who is qualified to be the personal coach and kind of the mentor for both Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant, it's actually this guy, Tim Grover. He is just a rock star. It was written in 2014, but it's still super, super relevant today. And again, any guy who can kind of give wisdom and guidance to people like Michael Jordan, arguably the best basketball player of all time and one of the most driven people, from all accounts, and then passing that to the torch of Kobe Bryant. I think we can learn a lot from Tim Grover. He's got a couple other books out there too, but I really like Relentless. And so he frames the book, and it's something I'd want you to go back and check out. And he calls people a cleaner. And that's kind of like his highest form of compliment. And it's the individual who are in the relentless pursuit of success and excellence. So again, for him, that cleaner is a person who is in the relentless pursuit of success and of excellence. And so the top questions, and I'm going to read these off, that Tim Grover almost says like, okay, you got to ask yourself this if you really want to be a cleaner. And if you say no to all this stuff, you kind of got some work to do. And so he says, do you push yourself harder when everyone else has had enough? Do you get in the zone and shut everything else out and control the uncontrollable? I think that's super important. You're not intimidated by pressure. You actually thrive on it. Again, to me, that sounds like Jordan. It sounds like Kobe. So I strive in certain aspects to kind of put on that cleaner mentality, especially when, things are really challenging. You got to go into work and work all weekend. It's like, no, this is what cleaners do. This is something that, to kind of balance from the prior book, you don't need to do it all day, every day. But if you want to get to where you want to be, having that cleaner mentality is super important. And as real estate investors, I think this is, and entrepreneurs overall, you got to adopt this mindset because you got to be focused, you got to be resilient, you got to be committed to achieving your goals, again, regardless of the obstacle. And I think you can find lucrative opportunities to succeed in real estate investing, but you got to have that cleaner mentality. So definitely check that out and really go back and reread that chapter of the book. The second thing he talks about is trusting your instincts and then also making decisive moves. I think sometimes not only to make trust, to trust your instincts, but not to waffle. Not to say you got to make a decision instantaneously every single time you've got something big coming up. Sometimes it's important to sleep on something, but like hemming and hawing for weeks on end or months on end, sometimes usually, making that change right away would have given you such peace of mind and probably check that, emotional and mental wealth from our prior discussion. But to me, it's really kind of leaning into encouraging investors to rely on your experience and your intuition to navigate, complex situations. And so I think it's something that, again, just usually, as they say within, real estate, sometimes your first out is your best out or your first offer is your best offer. Don't second guess yourself all the time. Sometimes just take it and move on. And the third thing Grover talks about is continuous improvement and then also being adaptable. I think obviously this is so key with where we're at right now in the real estate cycle is being adaptive. Again, you don't need to change your strategy every month, but if you're going to just do the same thing for 18 months and the market cycle is totally different, then that could be a recipe for disaster. And so kind of that continuous self-improvement and adaptability is key. If we think about it, I love the term pivot or using different types of leverage. So maybe it's making a staffing change. Maybe it's going after a little bit different sector of the market. We have our fixture and finish package where we want to make sure that we have a system, but because of where the market is right now, you have to stand out so much. And so we're actually going back in and really putting beautiful design elements in every price point of property that we're selling just to make sure that things pop. So again, you got to be adaptive. You can't just kind of like set it and forget it. I think that's going to be, a little scary. And again, in his term, he uses the term winner. Obviously, kind of harkens back to the sports thing, but having winning habits and having that winner's mentality is super, super important. So kind of a quick read, which is great. 3 or 4 main things that I got out of this book, but go back and read or read for the first time Relentless by Tim Grover. And it's something that's really, really awesome. Really love that book. Okay, so we come down the home stretch of the Elevation Business Book Club. A little curveball for you. And this is definitely an awesome podcast, man. If I could get on this podcast or have Chris as a guest, that would definitely check a big bucket list thing for me. But the podcast Modern Wisdom by Chris Williamson. And it's such a good one. One of my favorite episodes, no newsflash here, but was when he interviewed Alex Hormozy, who is the founder of acquisition.com. And they talked about 5 different things that I really want to bring up. But again, I would just check out this podcast in general. But it's really important that he looked at these 5 different tiers of personal development and really keeping people successful. And I would also weave this into how do you succeed on the heels of what's going on with AI. And so the first thing he talks about is holistic development. And that's emphasizing the importance of personal development alongside business growth. Kind of like I mentioned earlier, like I don't love the term work-life balance. Usually if you're really being successful, those things are so interwoven that trying to be in a more harmonious state, I think is the way to go. So you're developing that personal, improvement and growth mindset with hopefully growing your business. The second thing is really focusing on critical thinking. They encourage listeners to challenge conventional wisdom and think critically about investment strategies. So it might not be the best play. I'm personally thinking about a deal that I've got going right now. And we're at that tipping point where we might not make money on a flip. It's in a low price point, which has kind of gotten hammered lately. And it's not my long-term goal, but do I keep it as a rental? So it's something that I'm really thinking about. And I'm critically thinking about, do I keep this one as a rental or do I sell it, get, the majority of the capital back, move on to another project? But I think thinking critically is going to be super, super important. Kind of what a common theme of all these other books too, even in this podcast episode, is adaptability. And it's really learning to adapt to a changing market and the evolving trends within real estate. Quick little snippet, I'll actually say last month's data, there was 3 times the amount of inventory in the $500,000 to $750,000 price point than under 500 grand or over 750 grand. So again, just being adaptive, and maybe it's not focusing in that exact price point of going a little bit less expensive or a little bit more expensive, but thinking about that of being adaptive in your business strategy, I think is super, super important. Obviously bringing up networking and community building a supportive community, whether it's almost internal. So like whether it's your internal team of your sales staff, your operations staff, your marketing staff, finance, accounting, legal, but it's also a larger community. What are you doing with your fellow real estate investors, your fellow real estate agents, and really seeing what are the growth opportunities that I can do in my bigger circle? And I think that's a key to success. The last one that they talk about in this episode is mindfulness and well-being. Again, it's like balancing that entrepreneurial drive with the mental and physical health and well-being. I was just thinking recently, we've kind of, again, we've got all these deals going on. Summer's crazy for us as a family. And so we're going to be launching our own school community here shortly, which has been really exciting and fun for me to work on. But I've just been working every weekend. Luckily, my kids are high schoolers and into college, and so they sleep late. And so I can actually get enough done by noon and still see everybody. But I hit that third weekend, and finally, this will drop here just after Labor Day. But I was like, I need to actually take a little bit of time off. And so for the first time in a long time, I didn't work over the weekend. And so you just got to know like what's your tipping point and when you do push yourself beyond and get diminishing returns. Again, so many great episodes of Modern Wisdom. The other one I'd really point you back to is Simon Sinek. I think that episode's like 2.5 hours, but it's worth every second. Chris Williamson's really great at blending motivation, very tactical advice, and really rethinking how we're coming across all these challenges that we're dealing with in today's environment. And I think it's super important to look back at that. So, as we kind of wrap up for the Elevation Business Book Club, kind of give you a couple takeaways that hopefully should, be good threads throughout the 2 books and the podcast that we talked about. I'm excited to have this as a mainstay in what we're doing. I'm obviously always going to ask our guests what they're reading and what they're thinking about, but definitely kind of work on those 5 pillars of wealth, be relentless in your pursuit of excellence and what you're trying to accomplish. And then, stealing from his title, that Modern Wisdom, things are different today, man. We've got AI, we've got, political challenges, we've got social challenges. Just being, as smart as you can and trying to balance out your life and your work in that harmonious state. I think that's going to be super important. So thanks for tuning in, guys. Definitely engage with us. Hey, send us messages, send us DMs, email us, call us, whatever. I'd love to know, what are you guys reading? What are some of your most favorite personal development books? What are your best mindset books or podcasts? I think that's super important. So as we wrap up today, I hope you guys got a ton of value. We will definitely have more events coming up. We've got the Elevation Academy coming up on November 14th. Couple open seats for that. So sign up for that. Ton of meetups. So again, hope you guys enjoyed the episode, and we'll catch you guys on the flip side.
Elevation, elevation. Flip that house, man, this money for the making. We gon' get it, hustle harder.